Well, you're really good going, aren't you? Wait till you get home. You're going to wait till after dinner to have it.
Outside humbug.
Are we ready now? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here we go, friend. Here's the moment. Oh,
Big noise.
oh, here we go. Somebody coming out.
My goodness. Oh, hello. Are you here to hear a story? I believe you are. Please, come on in. Come on in.
Mind the steps as you go in, folks. Mind the steps. A little bit of uneven flooring.
Yes, first stanza of The Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. As probably most of you know, Jacob Marley, Scrooge's business partner, is dead at the beginning of the story. There is no doubt about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker. Scrooge signed it. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Now, did Scrooge know he was dead? Well, of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole friend, his sole mourner. Oh, he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, was old Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, clutching, grasping, scraping, covetous old sinner. Once upon a time, of all the good days of the year, upon a Christmas Eve, Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, foggy, biting weather. City clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. Now, the door to Scrooge's counting house was open that he might keep an eye upon his clerk, who, in a dismal little cell, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but his clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he could not replenish it. Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room. And so soon as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it would be necessary for them to part. Upon which the clerk put on his white comforter and attempted to warm himself with the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas to you, Uncle! God save you!" It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, which had come upon him so suddenly it was the first intimation that Scrooge had of his approach. "Bah!" said Scrooge. "Humbug! Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do. Out upon a Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills with no money? A time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer. A time for balancing your books and finding every item in them presented dead against you. If I had my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart, so he should. Uncle, nephew, you keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine." "Keep it? But, sir, you don't keep it." "Well, let me leave it alone, then. Much good may it do you. Much good it has ever done you." "Well, there are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited. I dare say Christmas amongst the rest. But I'm sure that I've always thought of Christmas time as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable time. The only time I can think of in the old calendar of the year where men and women seem by one consent to open their hearts freely and to think of those less fortunate than themselves as though they really were fellow travellers to the grave and not some other race of creatures bound on other journeys. And so, Uncle, although it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good, and it will do me good, and so I say, God bless it." The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. "Let me hear another sound out of you, and you shall keep your Christmas by losing your situation." "You're a very powerful speaker, sir." I wonder that you don't go into Parliament. Come, Uncle, don't be angry with me. Dine with us tomorrow. Good afternoon. I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot you and I be friends? Good afternoon. Well, I'm sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute, but I've made the trial in homage to Christmas, and so I shall keep my Christmas humour to the last. And so, a Merry Christmas to you, Uncle. Good afternoon. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon! The clerk, in letting Scrooge's nephew out, had let two other people in. They were portly gentlemen, pleasant to behold, and they now stood with their hats off in Scrooge's office. They had books and papers in their hands, and they bowed to him. Scrooge and Marley's, I believe. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night. Oh. Well, no doubt his liberality is well represented in his surviving partner. Mr. Scrooge, at this festive season of the year, it is more than usually desirable that we make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessaries. Many hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts. Are there no prisons? Yes, sir, there are plenty of prisons, but under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christmas cheer of mind or body to the unoffending multitude, well, a few of us are endeavouring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. Now, what shall I put you down for? Nothing. Do you wish to remain anonymous? I wish to be left alone. Since you ask me what I wish, that is my answer. I cannot afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the prisons and the workhouses. They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. Oh, but sir, many can't go there, and many would rather die. Well, if they'd rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge, dismounting from his stool, tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat. You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose. Well, if quite convenient, sir. Well, it's not convenient, and it's not fair. If I were to stock you half a crown for it, you'd think yourself mightily ill-used, I'll be bound. Well, yes, sir. And yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work? It is only once a year, sir. A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. Still, I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier next morning. The clerk promised that he would, and Scrooge walked out with a growl. The office was closed in a twinkling, and the clerk, with the long ends of his white comforter dangling down below his waist, for he boasted no greatcoat, went down a slide at the end of a lane of boys 20 times in honour of its being Christmas Eve, and ran home as fast as he could pelt to play at blind man's buff. Scrooge took his usual melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern, and having read all the papers and beguiled the rest of the evening with his banker's book, he went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms in a lowering pile of buildings up a yard. It is a fact that there was nothing at all unusual about the knocker on the door of this house, except, well, it was very large. Also, that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence at that place. Also, that Scrooge had as little of what you'd call fancy as any man in the city of London. And yet Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw in the knocker, without its undergoing any intermediate process of change, not a knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face, with a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge the way that Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on ghostly forehead. As Scrooge stared fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. He said, "Pooh-pooh," and shut the door with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder. But Scrooge is not a man to be frightened of echoes. No, he fastened the door, walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. Up Scrooge went, not caring a button for its being very dark. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But when he got to his own door, he walked through his rooms before he closed it to see that all was right. Lumber room, bedroom, all as they should be. Nothing under the sofa. Nobody under the table. Small fire on the grate. Spoon, basin. A little saucepan of gruel upon the hob. Quite satisfied, Scrooge closed the door and locked himself in. Double locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus, secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown, his hat, and his slippers, and sat down by the very low fire to take his gruel. When he'd finished, he threw his head back in his chair, and his eye happened to fall upon a bell. A disused bell, which hung for some reason now forgotten, and communicated with a chamber in the highest story of the building. It was with great astonishment and a strange, inexplicable dread that as he looked at the bell, it began to swing. Soon it rang out loudly, together with all the other bells in the house. This was succeeded by a loud, clanking noise deep down below, as if somebody were dragging a heavy chain across the casks in the wine merchant's cellar. Then he heard the noise much louder, coming from the floor below, then coming up the stairs, then coming directly towards his door. It came on through the heavy door, and a spectre passed into the room before his very eyes, and upon its coming in, the dying flame leapt up as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost. Marley's ghost." The same face, the very same. Marley, with his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights, boots. His body was transparent, so that Scrooge, observing him and looking through his waistcoat, could see the two buttons on the coat behind. Scrooge had often heard it said that Marley had no guts, but he'd never believed it until then. No, and nor did he believe it even then, though he looked the phantom through and felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and even noticed the very texture of the kerchief bound about its head and chin. Still, he was incredulous. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" Marley's voice. No doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Well, who were you then?" "In life I was your partner, Jacob Marley." "You don't believe in me?" "I don't." "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your senses?" "Well, I don't know." "Well, why do you doubt your senses?" "Because a little thing affects them. The slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheats. You might be a bit of undigested beef, a blot of mustard, crumb of cheese, a fragment of an underdone potato. There is more of gravy than the grave about you, whatever you may be. Now, Scrooge was not much in the habit of cracking jokes. No, the truth is he tried to sound smart in order to distract his own attention and keep down his horror. But how much greater was his horror when the phantom, taking off the bandage from around its head, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. Oh, mercy! Dreadful apparition! Why do spirits walk the earth, and why do they come to me? It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk amongst his fellow men. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. Oh, I cannot tell you all I would. I cannot stay. I cannot rest. I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walked beyond our counting house. Mark me. My spirit never roved beyond the narrow limits of our money-changing hole, and weary journeys lie before me. But you were always a good man of business, Jacob. Business. Business. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Mercy, charity, forbearance, benevolence, all these were my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. At this time of the year I suffer most. Oh, hear me, my time is nearly gone. Will, Jacob, but don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, pray. I am here tonight to warn you that you have a chance and hope of escaping my fate, a chance and hope of my procuring Ebenezer. Oh, you were always a good friend to me. Thank you. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? I think I'd rather not. Without their visits you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first at 10 o'clock. Expect the second at the hour of 11. And expect the third when the last stroke of 12 ceases to vibrate. Look to see me no more, but look that for your own sake you remember what has passed between us. He walked backwards from him, and with every step he took, the window raised itself a little, so that when the apparition reached it, it was wide open, and the phantom floated out through the self-opened window into the bleak, dark night. Thank you.